Welcome back to my channel, where today we have our first ever Stardom Situm of the Week, your favorite starts and sits of Week 4 Fantasy Football Week. Let's get right into it. First up, we have our start of the week at quarterback. It is none other than Daniel Jones. The Seahawks versus the quarterback position have not been very good. They have 328 passing yards per game allowed. 5 touchdowns to 1 interception on 66 completion percentage, just about 8 yards per attempt allowed. That is a lot of yardage per attempt at the quarterback position. And just for note, Danny Dimes against Arizona was 26 for 37 for 321 yards, 2 touchdowns and an interception on to go with 9 carries, 59 rushing yards, and 1 touchdown versus Arizona, who is not much better at the defensive position than Seattle is. Seattle has a very mediocre defense right now. I don't care that their corners are coming back. I think that it makes a decent difference, but I don't think it makes that much of a difference. I expect Daniel Jones to go out there and carry fantasy-wise. And as for my quarterback sit of the week, we have Lamar Jackson versus the Browns. Now, the Browns have been very good against quarterbacks this year, only allowing 111 passing yards per game, 1-to-1 touchdown-interception ratio, no touchdowns, barely any interceptions, though, on less than 50% completion rate, and just 4.7 yards per attempt allowed. The last 2 full games against the Browns for Lamar, he has not fared very well. He put up 20 for 32, 165 passing yards, a touchdown, and 4 picks, but added 68 carries to increase the fantasy totals a little bit for a total of 11.4 total points. And last year, when in the one game that he played against them, he went 9 for 16, 120 passing yards, 0 touchdowns, 0 interceptions, got 10 carries for 59 yards for a total of 7.7 total fantasy points. He does not fare well against the Browns as of late, and I would not bet on him to produce for your fantasy team. As for our running back start of the week, I really like James Cook versus the Dolphins. Now, James Cook's season stats, he's got 44 attempts, 267 rushing yards, that's 6.07 yards per carry, to go along with 10 receptions for 67 yards, that's 6.7 yards per catch, for a total of 43.4 fantasy points thus far, which is good enough to be number 12 overall for running backs. Now, Miami versus the running backs this season, first 2 weeks, obviously not counting Denver last week, that was a completely different type of game. Week 1 against the Chargers, Eckler had 16 carries for 117 yards with 4 catches, 47 yards, and a touchdown, to total 26.4 points. Stevenson in Week 2, not a great game by any means by the Patriots. However, he was good enough to get 15 total fantasy points on 50 yards, 60 total yards, and a touchdown. So I'm looking at James Cook to be really productive here. In Bills' high-powered offense, they're actually starting to run the ball a lot more, which is very good for the Bills, especially because that's an aspect of their game that they haven't had for the last couple of years, and I don't see him slowing down versus Miami. They're not a bad defense, but they're not great at stopping the run by any means. As for our running back sit of the week, we have Gus Edwards, another Baltimore Raven here. He's done decent, I guess. 29 carries, 145 yards, so just about 5 yards per carry and 1 touchdown. However, he is non-existent in the pass game, and the Ravens share a running back committee. He gets just about 50% of the running back carries and less than 50% of total running back touches. And Cleveland versus the run this season has been phenomenal. 52 rushing yards allowed per game. That's only 2.8 yards per carry and just 8 fantasy points per game to starting running backs. That is not something that fares well for Gus Edwards, and for that reason, he is easily the biggest sit of this week at the running back position. Now, as for my wide receiver start of the week, we have none other than the rookie sensation Puka Ngata. He has the most targets in the NFL thus far with 42, and the second most catches with 30. 338 receiving yards, which makes him the 4th most in the NFL, and 21 fantasy points per game, the 6th most total for the wide receiver position. Now, Indy has not fared well against the wide receiver 1 position this year by any means. In week 1, he gave up, to Ridley, they gave up 8 catches, 101 yards, 1 touchdown for 24.1 fantasy points. Week 2 did not fare any better. Collins had 7 catches for 146 yards, a touchdown, and 27.6 fantasy points. Week 3 was a little better. Flowers still had 8 catches, though, for 48 yards and 13 fantasy points. I think Nakua, with how many targets he is averaging, that being just, it's like 13, 14 targets per game, and averaging 10 catches, he should feast on Indy's defense, and that would allow him to score a plethora of points this week in fantasy. As for our wide receiver sit of the week, we have none other than DeAndre Hopkins. The Titans' offense is really, really bad right now. They're statistically the second worst offense in the NFL, only above the Jets, and Tannehill has only thrown 1 total touchdown pass. Hopkins this season is averaging just about 9 points per game, averaging 8 targets and only 5 catches with 153 total yards receiving. The Titans can't get anything done really right now on offense, and they're struggling, to say the least. Cincinnati has played very well versus the wide receiver 1 this year. They limited Amari Cooper to 3 catches and 37 yards for 6.7 fantasy points. Flowers was limited in their game against him, 4 catches to 62 yards, and Puka Ngata ended with 5 catches and 72 yards. However, half of those points came on one big play in garbage time to the Rams, and it pretty much just kind of blew up his point total. DeAndre Hopkins is going to struggle with this game because I think the Bengals are really finding themselves, and I don't see the Titans really bouncing back from this, and especially not due to DeAndre Hopkins. For my tight end start of the week, I've got fantasy breakout star last year, Evan Ingram. He has 21 targets and 18 catches. That's third most and second most for the tight end individually. 173 yards receiving, which is third most on the season for the tight end position, and the fourth most fantasy points at the tight end position this season. He's getting a lot of target share, and I expect him to do pretty well against the Falcons, who have allowed 24 total targets to the tight ends, 7th most in the NFL, allowed 18 catches, which is actually the 4th most, 8.7 average fantasy points per game to the tight end, which is also the 4th most, and 52 yards per game allowed to the tight end. That I expect Evan Ingram to have actually a big game in London this week, and I think that this is his week to just really produce for that Jaguars offense. As for my tight end sit of the week, I have Hayden Hurst. I made the decision between a couple of guys, but ultimately decided to go with Hurst. He has 13 total targets, but has only seen 6 in the last 2 weeks, along with only 4 catches in the last 2 weeks, and 7 total fantasy points. Andy Dalton last week threw for 360 yards, and he caught 1 pass for 11 yards. He's only played 50% of the snaps for the Panthers offense, and he just doesn't have that much of a target share in that offense. Minnesota versus the tight end position this year has averaged 6 fantasy points allowed to tight ends, and that's a little inflated because they gave up 2 touchdowns to 6'8" Donald Parham, and that's just not really realistic with the Carolina offense. They're pretty bad, but Minnesota only allows 25 yards per game total allowed to the tight end position. That's the 23rd ranked in the NFL. I don't see Carolina really using Hayden Hurst that much, and I don't expect him to have a big game against Minnesota, especially with Adam Thielen stepping into his own for Carolina. Last but not least, we have the defensive play of the week, none other than the Kansas City Chiefs versus the New York Jets. This one is pretty much self-explanatory. If you've been watching football, you will know how bad the Jets are. The Chiefs allow the 4th lowest points per game in the NFL currently and the 6th lowest yards per game. The Jets are tied for the 7th most turnovers in the NFL and have statistically the worst offense in the NFL. Zach Wilson is not playing well at all. Defenses this season also allow 12 or have 12 fantasy points per game versus the New York Jets. That's how bad they are. The Chiefs should just reign supreme on the Jets this week, and it should be easy money if you have the Chiefs defense. And to round off this video, we have none other than the Giants defense, our sit of the week. They are currently allowing the third most points per game in the NFL with 32.7, ninth most yards per game. They also have 0 total takeaways. That's right, 0. 2 total sacks, both of which came last week, the second worst in the NFL, and Seattle is averaging over 400 yards per game total offense in these last 2 weeks. They're firing on all cylinders, and they're finding a way to get it done, and that comes with a total of 29 points per game for the Seattle offense, which is the 4th highest in the NFL. If you still have the Giants defense, I don't know what you're doing, but you need to sit them, and they need to not be rostered anymore. They need to be off. Take them off. That's going to do it for this week's Stardom Situm Week 4. If you guys like this video and want to see more content like this from me, make sure you smash that subscribe button, comment, like if you're new here, and I will catch you guys in the next episode. Peace.